Did you know that the Jewish calendar, frequently discussed, studied, and admired by many, including Jews themselves, contains surprising curiosities that rarely reach the general public? At first glance, it appears to be a solid, ancient system, carefully preserved over the centuries. However, when examined more closely, intriguing details emerge that challenge widely accepted historical certainties. Among them, one of the most fascinating involves what scholars refer to as chronological inconsistencies, known as the lost years or missing years of the Jewish calendar. In today's documentary, we will delve into this little-discussed enigma and shed light on one of the greatest controversies in biblical and historical chronology. After all, what year are we really in when we examine the Jewish calendar through a critical and comparative lens? Does the system that organizes time from Adam onward accurately reflect known historical events? Stay with us and discover the background of this mystery that spans centuries, the intriguing case of the lost years of the Jewish calendar. The so-called missing years of the Hebrew calendar refer to a significant chronological discrepancy between traditional rabbinic dating and modern academic dating, especially when we examine fundamental historical events such as the destruction of the First Temple of Jerusalem. According to rabbinic tradition, this event occurred in 422 BC, corresponding to the year 3338 of the Hebrew Anno Mundi calendar. Most historians, however, based on Babylonian records, archaeological evidence, and astronomical data, place the destruction of the First Temple in 587 BC, revealing a substantial difference between the two systems of timekeeping. More broadly, this divergence exposes a deep conflict between conventional historical chronology, widely accepted in academic circles, and the chronology presented by the Seda Olam Rabba, a rabbinic text compiled around the 2nd century AD that offers an alternative narrative of Jewish history. One of the most striking examples of this discrepancy appears during the Persian period, when the Achaemenid Empire ruled the region of Israel. While conventional chronology indicates that Persian dominance lasted approximately 207 years, the Seda Olam dramatically reduces this period to just 34 years. This compression of time creates a difference of more than 170 years, triggering a cascading effect on numerous other historical milestones. One of the most significant impacts concerns the duration of the Second Temple of Jerusalem. According to later rabbinic tradition, the Second Temple stood for 420 years. Conventional historical chronology, by contrast, estimates its existence at approximately 589 years. This difference influences not only academic debates, but also directly shapes how biblical events are understood, taught, and interpreted within religious, cultural, and theological contexts. Academic chronology is broadly supported by a robust body of historical, archaeological, and scientific sources that complement one another. These include Persian, Babylonian, and Greek records, as well as administrative documents, royal inscriptions, and chronological tables preserved on clay tablets. One of the strongest pillars of this approach is the use of detailed astronomical observations, such as precise records of lunar and solar eclipses, which allow researchers to anchor historical events to absolute dates. These celestial phenomena function as true time markers, providing objective and verifiable testimony of ancient history independent of religious traditions or later interpretations. In contrast, the Seda Olam Rabba presents a different proposal. By condensing certain historical periods, especially those involving foreign rule over Israel, the text appears to aim not merely at recording facts, but at organizing the past within a specific theological framework. Many scholars understand this choice as a deliberate attempt to align history with the Jewish religious narrative, reinforcing the spiritual and cultural identity of the Jewish people. This effort becomes even more meaningful when considered within the context in which the Seda Olam was compiled, a period marked by dispersion, persecution, and the need to preserve national and religious cohesion in the face of lost political sovereignty. Despite these methodological differences, it is important to note that even within academic chronology, there are minor variations among scholars. In general, These differences are limited to 1 or 2 years for certain specific dates. Even so, there are historical milestones that are widely accepted, such as the Siege of Jerusalem in 597 BC. Both the Babylonian chronicles and the biblical texts agree that Nebuchadnezzar II captured Jerusalem during this period. The Babylonian chronicles, published by Donald Wiseman in 1956, provide particularly precise data, stating that the first capture occurred on the second day of the month of Adar, corresponding to March 16, 597 BC. Interestingly, even before the publication of these chronicles, the scholar Edwin R. Thiele had already reached a similar conclusion by carefully analyzing the biblical texts, placing the initial capture of Jerusalem in the spring of 597 BC. Other academics, such as William F. Albright, proposed slightly different dates, often pointing to 598 BC. Nevertheless, despite these minor variations, the general consensus remains. The siege and capture of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar marked a decisive turning point in Jewish history. After this first siege, Nebuchadnezzar installed Zedekiah as a vassal king in Jerusalem in an effort to maintain indirect control over the region. According to the biblical accounts, Zedekiah reigned for 11 years until his rebellion provoked a second and devastating siege. This renewed attack culminated in the destruction of the first temple and the definitive collapse of his reign. Although it is widely accepted that Jerusalem fell again during the summer month of Tammuz, the exact dates of this event continue to be debated among scholars. William F. Albright places the final fall of Jerusalem and the end of Zedekiah's reign in 587 BC, while Edwin R. Thiele proposes the following year, 586 BC. This difference, subtle at first glance, reveals the complexity of the chronological methods used to reconstruct ancient history. Thiele's proposal is based on the so-called Accession year method, a system widely employed for most of the kings of Judah. In this model, the year in which a king ascends the throne is not counted as his first full regnal year, but rather as a partial period known as the Accession year. Applying this method to Zedekiah, his first full year of reign would have occurred between 597 and 596 BC, following his enthronement by the Babylonians. From that point, the count proceeds systematically until the 11th year of his rule, the year marked by the final siege and the fall of Jerusalem. Thus, the end of his reign is placed between 587 and 586 BC. Considering that, in Judah, regnal years were traditionally reckoned from the month of Tishrei in the autumn, this calculation positions the destruction of the city and the first temple in the summer of 586 BC. The strength of this chronological reconstruction is reinforced by Babylonian historical records, which provide a detailed sequence of military campaigns and reigns, as well as precise astronomical data, such as eclipses recorded on cuneiform tablets. These elements function as fixed points in time, enabling historians to align biblical narratives with historically verifiable events. All of this highlights not only the reliability of modern analyses, but also the immense complexity involved in reconstructing events that took place more than 2 millennia ago. When we turn our attention to traditional Jewish sources, we encounter a different approach. Several rabbinic texts state that the Second Temple stood for 420 years, a calculation based primarily on the Seda Olam Rabba, a central work of classical Jewish chronology. According to this tradition, the destruction of the Second Temple occurred in the year 68 CE, which would imply that its construction began around 352 BC. To sustain this dating, a fixed interval of 70 years is assumed between the destruction of the First Temple and the beginning of the construction of the Second, leading to the conclusion that the First Temple was destroyed around 422 BC. Although this chronology exerted enormous influence and was widely accepted among ancient rabbis, it was never entirely unanimous. Texts such as Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, Midrash Lich Tov, and the writings of various Rishonim, medieval rabbinic authorities, present significant divergences from the dates established by the Seda, Olam, Rabba. These internal disagreements reveal that, even within the Jewish tradition, chronology has always been a debated, complex subject, far from absolute consensus. One of the central issues surrounding the Jewish calendar concerns the so-called lost years, a discrepancy of approximately 165 years in relation to academic chronology. According to traditional rabbinic calculations, the destruction of the First Temple would have occurred 165 years later than the date accepted by most historians, who place the event between 587 and 586 BC. This difference is not merely a matter of numbers, but reflects a fundamental tension between academic rigor, grounded in historical and archaeological sources, and the theological and narrative interpretation found in rabbinic traditions. The chronology of the Seder Olam Rabba, a foundational text in Jewish tradition, seeks to align historical events with a religious narrative, often simplifying or compressing long periods of time in order to emphasize spiritual and theological lessons. While this is understandable within a religious context, such adaptations may not align with the more broadly accepted historical data derived from external sources. At the same time, works such as Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer and Midrash Leach Tov reveal a more flexible and dynamic rabbinic tradition, in which historical details were frequently adapted to serve theological purposes or specific contexts. This dynamism suggests that Jewish tradition did not view historical dates as rigid and immutable, but as part of a broader symbolic narrative. In terms of rabbinic chronology, based on texts such as the Talmud and the Seder Olam Rabbah, the Second Temple of Jerusalem is described as having stood for 420 years. This calculation is of great importance within the Jewish narrative, as it directly links the history of the temple to the identity of the Jewish people and their relationship with God. The 420-year period is divided into several dynastic phases and periods of foreign domination, each with its own implications for the political and religious history of Israel. Let us examine these divisions in greater detail. Herodian dynasty, 103 years, from 35 BC to AD 68. This period corresponds to the peak and decline of the Second Temple, coinciding with the administration of Herod the Great, who expanded the temple and promoted the height of Jewish life under Roman control. However, this era also marked the beginning of decline and ultimately the siege and destruction of the temple by the Romans in AD 70. Hasmonean dynasty, 103 years, from 138 to 35 BC. The Hasmonean dynasty was established after the Maccabean revolt against Hellenistic rule. During this period, the Jews achieved a degree of independence, but as the dynasty aged, Israel gradually lost its autonomy due to the growing power of Rome. Seleucid Empire, 180 years, from 318 to 138 BC. The territory of Israel came under the control of the Seleucid Empire, one of the successor states that emerged after the division of Alexander the Great's empire. This period was marked by intense cultural and religious conflicts, such as the Maccabean Revolt, which had a profound impact on Jewish identity and led to the rededication of the temple and the relative independence of the Hasmoneans. Achaemenid Empire, 34 years, from 352 to 318 BC. This was the final period of Persian rule over Israel, during which the Second Temple was already functioning. Although brief, Persian influence on the administrative and religious organization of Judah was significant, and the rebuilding of the temple was encouraged and supported by the Persians. These divisions offer a detailed view of the various historical periods associated with the Second Temple, providing not only a timeline, but also insight into how dynastic changes and foreign powers shaped Israel's identity over time. Although rabbinic traditions tend to simplify certain aspects, the complexity and nuance of ancient Jewish history remain a fertile field for debate and investigation, especially when attempting to reconcile theological narratives with historical and archaeological findings. By disregarding the years prior to the effective beginning of the construction of the Second Temple, Rabbinic chronology establishes 318 BC as the date of the Persian conquest by the Greeks, indicating that Hellenistic rule began 6 years before the so-called Seleucid era, officially inaugurated in 312/311 BC. This chronological choice, however, stands in direct contrast to the widely accepted academic chronology, which places Alexander the Great's military campaigns in the region between 334 and 330 BC, based on Greek and Babylonian historical records and consistent archaeological evidence. This initial discrepancy already reveals how the two systems operate from fundamentally different assumptions when organizing history. The construction of the Second Temple is also framed in rabbinic tradition within a symbolic and theological interval of 70 years following the destruction of the First Temple. Based on 2 Chronicles 36:21, it is understood that the Second Temple was built in the 71st year after the Babylonian exile, placing its construction in 352 BC. This calculation implies that the destruction of the First Temple occurred in 423 BC, a date supported by later Jewish texts such as Megillat Antiochus. Once again, rabbinic logic prioritizes the internal coherence of scripture and interpretive tradition, even when this creates tension with conventional historical chronology. The 420-year duration attributed to the Second Temple is closely tied to the rabbinic interpretation of the prophecy of the 70 weeks described in Daniel 9:24-27. Within this framework, the total interval between the destruction of the First and Second Temples corresponds to 490 years, 70 years of exile in Babylon, followed by 420 years during which the Second Temple stood. This chronological structure imbues history with strong theological meaning, linking historical events to a broader prophetic plan. From an academic perspective, however, this biblical passage is interpreted in various ways, many of which are not tied to a literal or linear chronology. In summary, rabbinic chronology presents a rich, coherent, and deeply meaningful historical framework within Jewish tradition, while also revealing clear differences when compared to modern academic reconstructions. These divergences do not invalidate either approach, but rather highlight the complexity of the historical legacy of the Second Temple period. And when we carefully consider everything presented so far, taking into account both traditional Jewish explanations and academic perspectives, it becomes evident that there is indeed a significant discrepancy in the current Jewish calendar, which states that the world is approximately 5,786 years old. When we examine this issue more closely, certain problems become evident. There are, in fact, years that are not fully accounted for within the traditional Jewish chronological system. Many people, including those who regard the Jewish calendar as perfect, precise, and free of error, are completely unaware of the existence of these so-called lost years. This represents a cumulative gap of approximately 165 years, a detail that often goes unnoticed by those who do not delve deeply into chronological, historical, and comparative studies. Among scholars who construct a chronology from Adam to the present day, based on the scriptures and Jewish traditions, it is common to assert that the world is around 6,000 years old since creation. This calculation stems from a literal reading of the biblical genealogies and the Anno Mundi calendar. However, when we reflect on the days of creation in light of Jewish tradition itself, an alternative interpretation emerges: the possibility that the world may be around 12,000 years old. This view considers not only the 6 days of creation, but also 6 subsequent days extending to the present, understanding each day as an expanded period of time. In this context, the interpretation that for God 1 day is like 1,000 years becomes especially relevant. For many interpreters, this language should not be read in a strictly literal sense, but symbolically, serving as a key to understanding the vastness of divine time in contrast to human perception. This reading seeks to reconcile faith, theology, and philosophical reflection on the origin of the world. On the other hand, there are those who completely reject these approaches, and argue that the universe is millions or even billions of years old, based on modern scientific models such as cosmology, geology, and the theory of evolution. This further expands the debate, shifting the discussion into a complex arena where science, religion, and interpretation intersect, a subject that certainly deserves deeper analysis on another occasion. For now, however, the reflection remains. Had you ever heard about the lost years in the Jewish calendar? Feel free to leave your comments, opinions, and questions on this fascinating topic. May God bless you all, and see you soon.